Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's podcast. Today, I'm joined by David Harding, Executive Director of Business New South Wales. I've invited David because I consider him to be an incredibly adroit curator of humans. He has been, over his career, an individual who has always looked for the best in humans to get teams to work together, to make communities stronger, and to make day by day living and life in the communities he's served the best it could be. So, David, it's great to see you here. Thank you for joining us. I hope I didn't embarrass you with my introduction. Is that okay?
I'm blushing slightly, Chris, but thank you very much for your generous introduction.
That's okay. So, David, let me ask you, how do you introduce yourself? How would you describe what you do and who you are to your grandparents?
Indeed, I think that's quite a difficult thing to do, but my passion is in positive change and working with communities, large and small, to empower them to create a better outcome and show the path there, whether that's a financial path or whether that's a design path or whether that's a policy path. My passion is great outcomes, great teams, and great motivations and organization to achieve those aims. And I'm lucky enough to have had a number of roles through my career that have built up to the role I have now, which is really working with business, with government towards those better outcomes.
So you're the sort of linchpin between these different mindsets, these different communities, different worlds, and trying to communicate and translate between them in a way.
A translator and a connector, an influencer in part, but I think also as a storyteller, someone who can explain where we're going as much as how to get there. I think that bringing the agency out in others to get there is something which you need to be able to allow others to do, but being able to tell the story, being able to show the positive outcomes so you can bring people from all different backgrounds together to work together as a team, because teams and communities working together really are the only way you get things done.
That's great. Well, thank you very, very much for that. I appreciate that. Now, I believe you have a favorite cocktail or drink for us.
I do. I do. I speak to you here, of course, from the wonderful sunny city of Sydney, but Australia is, of course, the finest wine making country on earth. And my
Ooh,
favourite tipple
ooh,
is nice.
ooh.
It's a nice glass of Chardonnay from New South Wales or South Australia. So, cheers to you. Cheers to you, Chris. Enjoy a tipple of Shardy.
And cheers to you too, David. So, when did you begin to love the Chardonnay?
15 or 16 years ago
Yeah.
thereabouts when I, moved to South Australia, moved to Adelaide,
Okay.
which
Okay.
is a very beautiful city of a million people in between the hills, the Adelaide Hills, and the beautiful blue sea of the Great Bight of Australia. And they make
Yeah.
some of the finest wines in Australia there. Wonderful whites, wonderful reds. The reds tend to be a little bit heavy, and it's nothing like a cold glass of white wine on a hot Australian day. So I was hooked and have been hooked ever since.
Well, I think that sounds like a very reasonable hookage. Let me say, but I'm going to stay with the number 15 for a moment. Not necessarily 15 years ago, but back to when you were 15 as a young man,
Mm.
as a young lad. What did you imagine that David was going to be doing with his life?
Well, I think I had a fairly short horizon when I was 15. I was extremely anxious and keen to join the British Navy.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
I really couldn't wait for that moment that I could, go to naval college and learn those skills and get to work get to work on a ship at
Yeah.
sea. And it was really the only thought that I had in my mind when I was 15. I don't think
Yeah.
I ever thought as far as imagining to the grand old age that I've been granted now. I never
Yeah.
got that far. I was thinking very much about making sure that I got myself physically, mentally prepared to pass the interview boards and all that kind of thing. And it was an overriding passion that carried me
Yeah.
through, until I was almost 30. And I
Yeah.
guess on that point, and
Mm.
you might dig into this. The journey is much more important in my mind than destinations or milestones to be
Yeah.
measured by yourself or others around you. I think every day, enjoying and contributing every day has been the message for me, which has perhaps allowed me to enjoy such a varied career through my life, and allowed me to spring from one place to another place, um,
Yeah.
in sector, in working for government, working for the private sector, working in design, working in construction, working in policy. It's all
Yeah.
been about the journey. It's been about the enjoyment of the journey and the enjoyment of learning.
Yeah. Well, as you go on that journey, I really appreciate that, David, very much because I think we have similarities in that and thinking about how we went on that journey. And sometimes you never know what that next step might be. Because I believe, if I'm not mistaken, you spent a good time under the ocean.
I did not join the Navy thinking that I would spend a lot of my 20s under the ocean, but that's where it took me. It was very early in my career that it was suggested to me by my boss that I would make a fine submariner. I think they just wanted to hide me away from normal folks. I think submariners putting people in a submarine is a really great alternative to retrenching or redundancy, and I enjoyed it thoroughly. Of course, it was very different. It was a world of incredibly passionate and quite eccentric folk,
Yeah.
and it combined the need for a resilience and technical ability, as well as an
Yeah.
extraordinary, I think, ability to get on with people around you.
Yeah. I mean, it's incredible to think because as we're going on that journey, as you mentioned, that path is very often so critical, but we also take lessons with us each time. As
Correct.
we take and carry with us into the transition into the next one. And if you think back about at that point in your career as a young man, passionate, you know, what were some of the things that you took with you into the next phase? When you look back? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, isn't it? And particularly when in the modern world, it's important, I think, in many professional careers to be able to absorb a lot of new information as you go,
Yeah.
and find yourself situated with different scenarios and contexts around you, whether they be technical or whether they be human, or whatever. To remember, you can carry forward those foundational elements that you learn when you're young, and I think you learn from your family, you learn from your school, you learn from university
Yeah.
or college or whatever, and it's a patina that you build on strong foundations, which allows you to effectively engage in different situations while retaining yourself. For me, I think the Navy, of course, were very strong on leadership. They were very
Yeah.
strong on the foundational ethics of leadership, the
Yeah.
need to care for people and to be very clear. And we might come back to this, to be very clear about your objective, very clear about
Mm.
what you're trying to achieve as a team. How you get there is more due to the innovation or the innovative thought of the team working well together, rather than some rote, rather than some kind of preordained script. I think people think the military is very structured, but in fact, it does the opposite. It pushes agency down to the very lowest level that it possibly can to enable teams to deal with change. And that's what I've carried forward. I think that's probably the
Mm.
main lesson that I took: teamwork, the ethics of leadership, and that ability to delegate to the level of agency that you can find lowest, which enables your team to be able to react
Yeah.
safely to all of the other things, as well as, of course, that clear objective. We find it in projects, we find it in building projects, we find it building
Yeah.
cohesion amongst people who haven't worked with each other before, get them to agree on the overall outcome, and the detail can be worked out later.
That's quite fascinating about that. I mean, I appreciate that very much 'cause these are really things that we need to have today, more and more and more. And you think in a way, it's sort of a submarine was sort of a microcosm of our little planet in the big skies. We have everything we need here on our planet. You had everything you needed at in that submarine for a moment. And the choices you made every day mattered, you know.
Well, and perhaps more, everyone in the team mattered.
Yeah, that's a
No
good
matter
point.
what they did, I think everyone was as important as everyone else. If there were no passengers in a submarine, I mean, everyone was highly trained, of course, but no job was menial. Everyone was
Yeah,
important.
yeah,
And because everyone was important, everyone was respected. And because
yeah.
everyone was respected, the team worked well together. And I think that theme of no matter what your job is within a community or within the broader environment, the sense of purpose and being important and contributing to the outcome is important.
I think that's a really, really, really beautiful point that everybody matters, you know, like whether you're here on our beautiful planet or in your little microcosm, you said everybody matters and everybody has a role to play in the mutual respect. There is no one who is if you will, matters more per se in that sense. So that's kind of cool. So
Mm.
what did you do after that? You left service and then
Yeah, I did leave. I'd leave left service. I was a little less than 10 years in service, and left and joined an engineering and construction company. My transition was suitably haphazard. I think I mentioned earlier that I'm not very good at milestones, and I rather enjoy the journey. So I met a wonderful lady who was part of the government at the time undertaking a defence review, and she felt that I would be a very good investment banker. She was probably flattering me, but she was quite insistent that I looked at that as a career. I didn't want to wear a suit. I didn't want to get on the metro train every morning and travel to work in the commute. I felt that, and work with a computer. I thought that was really not where my skills lay. I
yeah.
probably didn't understand quite what an investment banker did, but she was very insistent. And in fact, her husband, who was the chairman of this global engineering company, wanted to meet me and put me into the interview process. And I ended up working in that sector. So I ended up working with railways. Ended up working in purchasing some very interesting companies around the world as the entity grew. And I had a kind of very rude and sharp awakening to the commercial world and the way that people
Mhm.
talk and the way with each other. And yeah, it was a bit of a baptism of fire, but it got me over the line.
That's great. So as you said, it wasn't necessarily I'm going to go there, but you're taking your leadership skills and your understanding of how teams worked and putting the teams together. That was really where you focused and you continued was this mediation if in a way. Is that correct?
I think so. I think the attraction, perhaps, of the civilian sector, as I saw it then, to my skill set was the ability to understand and manage complex risk, and that, of course, as we said earlier, is around having a whole team that works together with agency and training and so on. And the British rail industry at the time was suffering from a number
Yeah.
of issues, and they thought that I might be able to help. But yes, I think despite the teething problems that I naturally came across as a young man working in the commercial sector for the first time, I carried forward I relied a lot on that kind of innate sense of getting to the right outcome, bringing the right team around me, and bringing people along with me.
And at some point you decided to go to the other side of the world. I mean,
I did.
yeah, from England to Australia, you don't just take a rowboat and do that. How did that happen?
I I went on a long holiday and never went back. Is probably the truth. Um,
I love it.
and for personal reasons, I felt the change was a good one.
Mhm.
Australia was and is my favourite country on earth. It remains
Yeah.
so. It's a wonderful place, of course. It's beautiful. It's huge.
Yeah.
It's the size of continental USA. It has the most beautiful flora, fauna, geography, geology, sea. Everything about Australia is absolutely wonderful. And I took the opportunity to come and give it a go. And interestingly enough, I also took the opportunity to take a little bit of a break and do something which I'd always wanted to do, which was to go and work in as a manual labourer and machine operator and so on in a world with very little responsibility, but an extraordinary opportunity to get to know real
Hmm.
Australians at a day-to-day level. I will say it.
Hmm.
I've said it before, and I'll say it again. It was by far and away the most fun months, almost a year of my life. I had enormous fun, and I made friends for life out there
Yeah.
in the hot outback of Australia, hitting things hard with a hammer.
That's really amazing because, so many people say they can take a sabbatical and they run off to some library someplace or go work, and you decided to go and do manual labor, which is fantastic. I love it.
Yes, I wanted to. It was a great break in a way, and it was a great opportunity to understand the way that Australians think and speak, the way that they work, and what motivates Australian workers. It introduced me to the Australian union system. It introduced me to the Australian standards and productivity levels at a lower level. And it also allowed me, and maybe we'll come to this in a second, it allowed me to make a shrewd judgment on who I could trust in the
Hmm.
supervisory levels of Australian construction. And so when the time came for me to take a senior leadership role, I was immediately able to put my fingers on those fine folk that I could trust and knew would keep the job and the people on it safe.
That's great. Learning who to trust. Steve Covey says change happens at the rate of trust. So if you want to make change happen in some ways, you have to know how to have the trust and to build the trust and know who to trust. That's
You
interesting.
absolutely do. And if you
Yeah.
want to make change, and in those days, and this is a long time ago, of course, in those days, health and safety wasn't what it is today, and there was
Mhm.
a real need to change culture within large construction projects to ensure that staff went home to their families safe and well.
Mhm.
And so having the right first followers in that movement of change to persuade the wider group of hundreds of workers that safety was not only paramount, but it was also
Hmm.
achievable, and didn't stuff up what they were trying to do. It was great. So having that team around me from day one, when I did take on a large project, which obviously happened quite quickly, but it made life a lot easier and enabled us to construct vast projects with no harm done and a high quality of work.
That's really fantastic. And when we think of that, the title of our podcast, "Choosing to Matter," it's there again. How you choose to matter by helping to defend safety, ensure the safety of another human. It's a pretty strong choice to make, mate. That's really wonderful.
Well, and I think that choosing to matter thing was important back in those early days when I was, I spent almost 3 years in the Australian desert and outback reconstructing one of the world's largest railways. It's called the Indian Pacific Railway, and motivating the teams who were really in very remote and difficult conditions, very difficult weather between flooding and fire,
Hmm.
sandstorms, and so on. It was to make sure that every single one of them knew that they mattered and what they were doing mattered. And the motivation that I used for them was that they were nation building.
Mhm.
They were building a better nation. They were building a more productive nation. And many of them, of course, were aspirational Australians. They wanted to be Australian. They weren't there yet. They were on working visas and such like.
Yeah.
So making sure that everyone mattered, that they
Yeah.
all mattered to each other, was really important. Yeah.
Hmm. That's really interesting. I like how you said nation building and aspirational Australians. As you say, individuals who really were there to make more of themselves for their families and the choices they made. Because I haven't had the privilege of going across the nation on the rail yet, but some pretty desolate, lonely territory out there,
It
right?
looks
I
like it
mean,
from the sky. It's miles and miles of desert as far as the eye can see. Um, but at ground level, it's fascinating and
hmm,
impossibly complex.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's I like that word complex because this is sort of the world we're in today is a bit impossibly complex at times. I guess part of what you try to do is take the impossible complexity and make sense out of it. I think if we jump into some of the things you're doing today, going from the outback
Mm.
and dealing with impossible complexity, tell us a little bit more about some of the work you're doing today.
I think somebody once said to me that everything worth doing today is complex because all the easy things have already been done. And I think that is
Yeah.
probably true not only in engineering, not only in in the kind of engineering and digital technical worlds, but also I think in the complexity of our societies, in the complexity of geopolitics, in the complexity of our relationships to our own governments, our own communities, and so on. We have layers and layers of complexity, which in the past were either papered over or perhaps with more monolithic communities were not there. Australia is interesting because it's one of the more multicultural nations on earth.
Yeah.
In Sydney, we have well over 100 different nationalities of origin
Wow.
in the Australians that live here. And so
Hmm.
the political decision making, the policy decision making, the way that we design policy to inform in the proper investment, proper strategy, proper built environments, and so on, it is naturally complex. And that sits within the framework of a world order that's changing around us. I think in many ways to make sense of that is very difficult, but principles and simplicity of principles are incredibly important at one end. And at the other end, simplicity and unity around shared outcomes is also incredibly important as two bookends, as it were, to all of the complexity in the middle. It's a muddle, but I think good leaders in complex worlds really do refer to outcomes that we can all recognize and
Hmm.
also make their decisions based on good principle.
Yeah. I hear you. I think it's interesting, as you said, this shared outcomes when you're dealing with so many different cultures together and different languages one needs to speak, and you have also the history with the First Nations and the individuals who
Mm.
occupied the land before you and our forefathers arrived and mothers. And so this is just there's a complexity in time as well, and not just this cultural moment today, which is intriguing.
Well, it's interesting you mention that, isn't it? Because I think having that 60,000 years of history before colonial Europeans arrived in Australia is one of those anchor principles of being
Mm,
and place, identity,
yeah,
and commonality that should be something that brings us together as one rather than divides us,
yeah,
which unfortunately has been something which has eluded um, us for a long time. I think over time we have chipped away at that concept, but we've never quite landed it.
yeah.
Really is a peculiarly Australian part of a history and present.
Yeah. But we'll get there. I think so, especially when you think about if you're the springboard from today until tomorrow. Because if you just mentioned you got 65,000 plus or minus, or plus or minus years of looking back into where we are today, more recent, and now looking forward. When you look forward, what are some of your thoughts about our near, mid, and longer term future? Some of your aspirational
Mm.
thoughts and some of your hopes.
I am a human who luckily sees the world as half full rather than half empty. And
Yeah.
I think that hope does spring eternal. And I think the
Hmm.
hope is something that needs to be carried strongly in our thoughts, because without it, we might, in fact, shape our own future based on one without hope. And that is a self fulfilling prophecy. So, at the heart of, I think, my thoughts around the future is that there's every opportunity that we can do better, that we can create a better future for children, grandchildren, and beyond. And I think that if we don't do that, as I say, we can become our own self fulfilling prophecy. I also
Yeah.
think that in times of great change, community does need to come together and work together. We do need to appreciate the smaller elements of society and perhaps return to those principles of strong communities making sensible decisions, which will carry us through what appears to be an impossibly turbulent eddy in front of us. I
Hmm.
don't think we know what's going to happen. I don't think
Sure.
anybody's ever known what's going to happen. But if we do look at history and look at the most turbulent times in the past, it has been the communities that have had the strongest values, the strongest sense of value in themselves that have come out of the turbulent times strongest. And hope should never be thrown away. We
Yeah.
should also perhaps start looking very much more closely at the good that is going on around us rather than concentrating on all those negative aspects or
Yeah.
things that happen beyond our control that we can't control, and focus
Yeah.
on the good things that we can control.
I think that's a really wonderful lesson to remind ourselves again and again to focus on the good. Research shows us that you have to see 5 times something good to overcome one thing that's bad, because this is how humans work or something. So let me ask you, along these lines, and I agree with you fully. I mean, I echo everything you've just said there, David. What are you doing personally to help continue to build this hope, to build a community? Because I know you're very active in many different organizations and projects. Just give us a couple of examples that we can sort of go, okay, and maybe we can amplify in other parts of the world to help this.
Mm. Well, I'll give you a couple of examples. I think one is a football team that I work with closely, who have a social agenda
Now, wait a minute.
beyond.
Which football are we talking about? There's three that I'm aware of.
We're talking about your soccer and our
Okay,
football.
okay.
About the one with the round ball. Yes, exactly. It's called the Western
Yep,
Sydney Wanderers. It's a wonderful
yep,
organisation, and it plays in the A League of Australia, which is the kind of top level of Australian soccer.
yep.
But their agenda is far, far beyond just, as I say, beating opponents on the pitch, which we sometimes struggle a bit with. But the social cohesion agenda is
Uh,
strong,
yep,
founded to win two battles, one on the pitch and one in the street. And the foundation that I work with really concentrates on young women in the community, young people in the community, new Australians, uniting families,
hmm,
communities, disenfranchised children around sport, around a sense of cohesion, belonging, and frankly, pride of parents and their
nice.
children, particularly the young women, the young girls who are thriving at
Hmm.
football. The effect is much more powerful than you would imagine.
Yeah,
It's a spark of dust, I think, that makes me smile when I think about it. It's a wonderful thing to be involved in.
I love this because it reflects, I think, your passion for teams, right? Because I think,
Mm.
as you said, even in the 20s, when you spoke with your time in service as a team, and then managing large construction projects with teams, and this is coming back to the importance of the team and working together. I think just a theme which I'm just observing at this point.
I think that's right. And I think within the broader context, social cohesion in a changing world, a world
Also,
riven by terrible events happening around the world that have
yeah,
a reflected echo in the communities around us, social cohesion is incredibly important. And when you take that
yeah,
down to its individual parts, which are the families,
yeah,
the streets, and so on,
Yeah.
Whatever you can do to maintain a sense of identity, a sense of common identity. And soccer's good for that, right? There's a saying that says every great city has a great soccer team, and every great soccer team has to have a great city behind it. And I
Fair
tend to
point.
think that's right. Mm.
Fair point. Okay, you were starting to talk about a second project. I interrupted you. Sorry.
Yeah, look, I've worked for many, many years with a charity. It helps First Nations Australians now to people around the world. That means people of the ancient culture, the ancient
Hmm.
bloodline of Australia going back to those 60,000 years and more, who, for many sad reasons, wicked reasons over colonial years, have been disenfranchised.
Hmm.
And the charity works with young children, young adults, to open up their minds and their eyes and their opportunities to careers in technical engineering type careers,
Oh,
and
cool.
then
Yeah.
helping them through school into university. We have wonderful partners who are like the large mining companies, large engineering companies, the universities, and the like. And it's been an absolute joy to work with that
Hmm.
charity for many years. And I think the really wonderful thing is the legacy. It's almost the charity's been around for almost 30 years. The legacy is the alumni. So across Australia, in many of our great engineering and design houses and so on, the students that have come through our scheme now are there to pass on their leadership, their mentorship to the next generations coming through. So again, it makes me smile that I can have a tiny piece in correcting something which is terrible in our history, but more to the future, to
Yeah.
work with these young people who have hope, who have
Yeah.
smarts. One of the kids said at our last graduation, when asked, "What would you say in 10 years' time to the kids coming through?" And he said, "If you think you can't, you're wrong, you can." And I've carried that ever since. I think
Beautiful.
it was absolutely beautiful.
That's
Yeah.
that's really beautiful. I really, truly like that a lot. I really do. Thank you for sharing this. I'm always curious about how, when we face, as you've already indicated, we're facing a very turbulent time, and we're facing many statistics with our global planetary health statistics, many different ways, which can be disconcerting and can worrying, right, for the next generations. And I often wonder, where does one go to continue to gather strength and inspiration for, if you will, continuing to fight the fight and to look to try to continue to make change happen. So where do you? I was going to say the soccer pitch, but maybe there's another. Where do you get? Where do you find your inspiration to keep making change happen?
I think one of the great challenges that I work with in the policy area in Australia is the scourge of mental ailments amongst younger people. Not all
Hmm.
younger, but a couple of generations where it's sometimes termed a tsunami of ailment of these types. And I think it probably is one of the great challenges of our time at the moment in the developed world. I am of the understanding that it is a shared problem across much of Europe,
Yeah.
across much of North America, and so on as well. I don't know what the reason is.
Hmm.
I could postulate. We could all point mobile phones or social media or changes in society and family structures and so on. We don't know what the answer is, but I think what we do know is that those who give and are respected for giving draw a great deal of comfort and strength from being part of a community that works together, where
Hmm.
giving and contribution are truly recognized as
Hmm.
much as individual attainment. I think individual attainment is something that we should, of course, measure people by, and we should, of course, give plaudits to those who do well.
Yeah.
But I think the quiet achievers that I've met in my life,
Mm.
whether
Mm.
they be in charity, whether they be in construction, whether they be quiet achievers as leaders of work gangs in the outback and so on, are the ones that I remember. And also, not very scientifically, I remember to be very much the happiest. The
Mm.
ones that
Mm.
feel part of a network, feel part of a greater movement, and feel part of that movement that doesn't rage against things that they can't control, but takes great pleasure in affecting change where they can.
Mm. So do what you can, not what you can't. I think it's a wonderful thing, David. Yeah.
I think that's exactly right. To the words of our young lad, if you think you can't, you can. So don't limit yourself, but
Yeah.
don't also be depressed by things that you can't control. Work work to the things that you can, and it'll amaze you where that gets you to, and it'll amaze you how much working with a group, working with a team, working with a community might well
Yeah.
actually end up changing some of the things you thought you couldn't.
Yeah. Are you surprised at where you are today? I'm just because when you were just saying, like, at an age of 20, you had a very clear mission, and your choice that time to matter was to be part of your national defense and to defend, freedom, democracy for your nation. At that point, I don't think your 20-year-old lad ever imagined that future David Harding would be a change maker in the Australian Sydney ecosystem.
Well, I never thought I'd be interviewed by the great Chris Lukeman, but and this is obviously, um, a real moment and milestone that I will remember, and I don't
Mm.
say that flippantly. I've always admired your thinking and your thought, and it's extraordinary, really, to be here.
Thank you, David.
I, I've been incredibly fortunate.
Hmm.
I think I've been incredibly fortunate to have great friends when I have stuffed things up to help pick me up. I've
Yeah.
had very forgiving friends and family who
Yeah.
have forgiven my mistakes and allowed me to move on, learn from them, and grow from them rather than be limited or stunted by those mistakes that we all make. In
Hmm.
answer to your question, am I surprised? Yes, of course. I think, you kind of wake up every morning and pinch yourself because you live in a wonderful city like Sydney, in a wonderful country like Australia. There's all of that. And for me, I love learning. I love the variety of dealing with many different things, from trade and investment through to non-for-profit issues and social cohesion issues, and all of those things. The variety is amazing. So I feel incredibly fortunate. And yes, I think sometimes I question whether or not I should be here. I think we all need to do
Well, you should be here, David. We need you.
I think my
Yeah.
20-year-old self would be completely befoxed and befuddled and wonder what 52-year-old Harding was up to. And I think, again, it's quite
Yeah.
difficult to explain exactly what I do. Sometimes I forget what I do myself. But yes, it's been a wonderful journey, and I'm incredibly lucky to be where I am today.
No, David, it's incredible. And it's wonderful to hear your thoughts, to learn a bit more about your journey and your choices over time, and especially how you pointed out for us that managing complexity and complex risks is a task we all have to do, and how to really to focus on our shared outcomes. And
Mm.
I think that's a key for me to take away from you. It's like, okay, we've got these challenges. What's the positive outcome we're trying to achieve? And then the critical importance of community. This is something you emphasized again and again and again. I translate that into teams, but that's also community. And this has been a thread which is very strong, and the thread which we're going to need as we go forward. And I loved the last two things was the quiet achievers. That's a beautiful thing to remember. The quiet achievers, not the loudest, but the quiet achievers matter, as all of us do. And finally, how to belong. We all belong to this beautiful planet. We all belong to the community of Homo sapiens and to this incredible web of complexity of nature. And David, it's been a real privilege and a pleasure for me to spend this time with you. And I want to thank you and for sharing your journey with me and with us. And I really look forward to our paths crossing again physically at some point.
I also look forward to that very much, Chris, and thank you so much for the conversation today. It's been an absolute pleasure and an honor.
Yeah. And hey, let's do a toast to our collective future and the communities we serve.
Good on you, mate.
Good on you. All right. Cheers.